Let us get started again, everybody. Next up, we have a panel, and by panel, I think we mean 3 half-hour, mostly independent presentations. The panelists, as you will soon see, are an incredibly raucous bunch, and there is no way that I could keep them in line. And so we had to pull out the big guns. So we have a panel chair who will preside over the next 3 talks. This is David Rosenthal. David is a professor of philosophy at the Graduate School of the City University of New York, where he is also the coordinator of their cognitive science program. He is a past president of the Association for the Scientific Study of Consciousness and has studied consciousness in many of its different guises. I think we heard from one of the previous speakers about Zenon's opinion that if someone talks about consciousness, they have no idea what they're talking about, which I think means that probably more than just about anyone in the field, David really doesn't know what he's talking about. There you go. And so with that, I will turn it over to David, who will take charge of this panel and introduce Jacquie.
Thank you very much, Brian. I'm going to say a word or two about Zenon. I wouldn't be able to come close to Brian's elegant and magnificent presentation this morning, but it is a very special pleasure and privilege for me to participate in this splendid celebration of Zenon's work and his role as the founding director of RUX and its director for many years thereafter. Zenon's work has defined research agendas and vision in the cognitive sciences generally. To mention just a few topics in cognitive architecture with multiple object tracking and his visual indexing theory and his compelling critique of pictorial views of mental imagery. His work in these and many other areas is a model of penetrating groundbreaking work in cognitive science. Our first speaker is Jacquie Burkell. Jacquie is Associate Professor of Information and Media Studies and Assistant Dean of Research at the University of Western Ontario. Her research focuses on the interaction between users and information, emphasizing the influence of cognition on information use. This work includes examinations of information credibility assessment, the use of information decision-making, and human-computer interface design. Among her current projects are a review of the impact of decision-making heuristics and biases on the interpretation of health information for patients participating in health decisions. She will talk this afternoon about life lessons from Zenon's lab, cognitive science, and other stuff.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm so pleased to be here. It's absolutely lovely to be here to celebrate Zenon. It's a real gift to me. And I did not have the opportunity to participate in Zenon's life here at RUX, is how you say it. But I'm part of a cohort of people who were his students at the University of Western Ontario before he left us there. Something that has had a tremendous influence on me and my work and my life. And I'm so glad that I had this opportunity to speak. Oh, is it not on? It was on earlier.
You should really speak into
I
it.
have to pick it up. How about that? Is that better? Okay. So I entitled this talk, Life Lessons from Zenon's Lab, Cognitive Science and Other Stuff. I have to say in preface that my life my research in particular, has undergone a massive shift since I left Zenon's lab, and this talk will represent a significant shift from what's gone on this morning, which will be interesting. I thought a lot about this talk, and after I gave Sue the title, I decided that really wasn't the talk that I wanted to give. And instead that I want to give a talk that's actually some empirical work that I've undertaken on discovering Zenon, a qualitative exploration in 3 parts. One of the ways in which my work has changed, in fact, is that I've started doing more qualitative research, which is, to someone who's trained in visual psychophysics, has been a bit of a bizarre shift, but I find in looking at applied problems and real-world problems that it often gives us better tools to more fully understand the subject that we are looking at. So the subject right now is Zenon. This is neat. So part 1, Zenon the guy. Method is qualitative interviews. So I decided that if I wanted to know more about who Zenon was and what his influence has been, that I should really go around and I should ask some people. Much to my dismay, when I asked a number of people on the street, I kind of got this response. It was like, I don't know. I realized there was a methodological flaw that I had to work on, and I thought about this for a while, and I thought perhaps what I need to do is I need to go talk to people who know Zenon better. And of course, at the University of Western Ontario, among the cohort of people I know there are many who know Zenon quite a lot better. So when I went to these people and I said to them, you know, Zenon's retiring, the first response was universally, no way. That can't possibly be happening. The second response was just as universally, and by the way, this kind of universality in qualitative research is really meaningful when these kinds of themes consistently emerge. We know or assume that they are deeply, deeply representative of the subject of study. So the second response universally was, what a great guy. And the third response was almost universally story. I remember the time. Those stories involved a lot of scotch. Sometimes single glasses, but more often, to be quite frank, multiple glasses and bottles. A lot of those stories also involved cigars. Now, personally, I have not experienced the cigars, but I think many people here might have. And usually the cigars and the scotch and the stories actually went together. There were a few outliers, like mystical or mythical schnook. And missing, I did get the photo of the convertible. This is to Brian and Roy, missing convertibles, which had to do with time in Florida where they scooped the best car. The stories always involved parties, and we'll remember a lot of those. They always involved good conversations. That people would talk about Zenon, as comes no surprise here, as being a very, very, very smart guy. But not just that, a very thoughtful guy. Somebody who one could have, and we have had, many, many interesting and wide-ranging conversations. So yeah, he's a pretty interesting guy. A great friend. And that's something that's really important. Zenon has a lot to say and think and contribute, not just about science, but about relationships and about friendships and about the way in which the world works. And a terrific colleague. These are all things that I hear whenever I go somewhere and I say that I worked with Zenon, and as people who know him, these are the kinds of things that I hear and I have continued to hear ever since that's been, or have always heard since that's been part of my life story. So part two. Zenon the guy is important, but we had to move on to part two. Part two is Zenon the academic. So again, my ways of doing research have shifted, and in conducting this part of my study, I thought I would do a content analysis. And again, I'll take a qualitative perspective on this instead of the more traditional quantitative perspective. And because I'm in a school of media studies, and because this is the way the world works now, the place that I went is to the internet. So I went to the internet to find out about Zenon. Helpfully, one of the first hits that came up was how to pronounce Zenon Pollution. Now, to tell you the truth, I followed the link and it wasn't quite as good as it looks, but I really thought this was really a good thing because xenon just doesn't work, and Pollution, which you hear often enough, doesn't work either, and you always have to correct the way in which the name is spoken for people who don't know Zenon in particular. So this is a resource that is particularly interesting. It's interesting to me to know, if you work as I do, not only in media studies, but in an information science school, the Wikipedia is evil. But nonetheless, I go to it a lot because I find it to be pretty useful to tell me a number of things, including the kinds of things that are deemed to matter in the world. And Zenon has not one, but two, and in fact, three, where's the third one? Pages on Wikipedia. He has his English page, he has his Portuguese page, and for some interesting reason that you might be able to enlighten us on, Zenon, you have a Finnish page on Wikipedia. I don't know who, because of course you don't know who produces these, but I don't know personally any other person who has one Wikipedia page, let alone three. Well, that's not true. I went to high school with Brian Adams, so I'm sure he has a Wikipedia page, but it's not of the same sort. So that impressed me a lot. But this really impressed me. So somebody named Stephen Deedon has a site or has a page that is the secret of Zenon Pollution, and I had to go there. Because I thought if he knows a secret that I don't know, that's got to be pretty interesting. But I went there and this is what happened. So I thought of joining Stephen's page, but then I thought, no, this could be bad. So I didn't. If anyone knows Stephen or knows what the secret is that he has, I would love to hear it. Well, and then of course I had to go to Google Scholar. And we all know the kinds of things that Zen has published, but the point that I think is also important to make is in Google Scholar, it cited thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of times. This is not now, or not just historically, but recently. Zenon's work is important and has been important and continues to be important, as we've seen here. But really, what better source could you have than Google Scholar? And this tells the whole story. All right, so Zenon is a fabulous guy. He is undoubtedly an excellent scholar. But what about as a mentor? There are many of us here who've experienced Zenon as a mentor. So my method here is participant observation. And as I sit in this room, and I have already listened to and will continue to listen to for the rest of the day, talks that people are giving here over and over again, you hear people commenting about the various ways in which Zenon has influenced their work. That Zenon has been an incredibly important mentor for many of us here. And I think we're incredibly lucky to have experienced that. Now that part, participant observation, of this particular conference is obviously ongoing, so it's pretty hard for me to report on the results. But I can report on Zenon's mentoring from an autoethnographic perspective. Now, I've never really done autoethnography. I'm not even really sure what it means, but hey. So here's the things that Zenon taught me, some of which I failed at. So the first was avoid administration. I failed. I am the Assistant Dean of Research. I have to say that of all administrative roles, it's the best administrative role. I wouldn't take on another one. But I think this is an important lesson that perhaps I didn't get quite well enough. Zenon used to tell us, don't sweat the small stuff, and the corollary to this was throw money at it. And that's something that I have really tried to hold on to, and I have been more or less successful about. That in my experience, and I think many of the people that I worked with would recognize the same thing, that the things that mattered really mattered, but the things that didn't matter so much, Zenon just didn't pay much attention to. I think it's an incredibly important lesson to let go of the things that don't matter. Zenon invited us as students to take risks, and to take intellectual risks, to take risks in thinking about things that other people might not be thinking about. And I won't forget when, I think it was one of the many trips down to Florida where he first started talking about skunk works, and the idea that you could have a group of people working within an institution, an organization, thinking about things in ways that were underground. It's not about being underground, but it's about thinking the unusual things or not taking the well-trodden path necessarily. And that too is both incredibly freeing, and it makes for a more interesting intellectual life. At the risk of sounding self-serving, one of the things that Zenon really did teach us all was to find other smart and other interesting people and hang out with them. The interesting people that I know from working with Zenon and being in his lab, who continue to be my friends, enrich my life. And I think about this as I'm interacting with the people around me. I think that paying attention to what people have to say and the ways in which they talk about things. And the one thing you can say about Zenon, Brian's talk at the beginning, he talked about these 4 people who were celebrating. That's extraordinary in Zenon's breadth of contribution, but it's also extraordinary in his breadth of interest. And that's something I can't even aspire to anything near the contribution that Zenon's made, but I think I aspire to something near that breadth of interest, that I want to pay attention to many, many areas of inquiry, many, many, many ways of thinking, and not get stuck in a narrow confines. Brian, I had this slide in, and I took it out, and I put it back in again. Where are you? Because you talked about this, that I learned this lesson viscerally in Zenon's lab. I'll never forget it. We were at a talk in the computer science department, and for whatever reason, this is a computer science guy who I thought was treading in the area of visual psychophysics and making some pretty bad points, and I decided to go after him. And Zenon kind of looked at me afterwards and said, well, kind of, why did you do that? It's like, I guess there really wasn't a point. That it's not, that the point is not to be critical, the point, and not to be negative, or so it's not to be critical and not to be negative. Instead, what I want to do, and what he taught us to do, what he modeled doing in our intellectual and academic work, was to tackle the interesting problems. So if you focus on where you're going and not where other people are going, then again, it leads to a much better enterprise. And I think above all, love what you do. So I think Zenon has a career where he has deeply enjoyed the work that he's done. I know that my experience as a graduate student in his lab was that we certainly enjoyed working with him. And I think that it's been an exciting and interesting career. I think this, perhaps above all, is the lesson that I take from Zenon, and the piece that I hold on to that I hope to continue to inform the work that I do. So, thank you so much, Zenon.